Hi, I'm currently at Dade Battlefield or Massacre State Park in Sumter County, Florida. This was the site of one of the most resounding Native American victories over American forces in all of the history of the American Indian Wars. Let me tell you a bit about it. Hello, this is a little unconventional for the usual historic site videos I do, as typically I like to go for the unimportant but rather decrepit sites. This one is by no means decrepit. This is a state park. Where I am is Dade Battlefield State Park, and here I'm making this video to commemorate one of the greatest victories over the United States ever seen on our own territory. Where I am behind me is where Major Dade fell. It says it right there on a monument resembling an upside-down howitzer, for that is how the monument was marked for much of its history. Once an expedition was sent here to go and recover bodies, an upside-down howitzer that was thrown into a pond by Seminole forces after the Americans' defeat. The symbol of the upside-down howitzer in the ground has become a symbol of this park as a whole. As I walk, there are many upside-down howitzer-shaped monuments for the many Americans who lost their lives. This area is my homeland. I'm from Lake County and I have spent a lot of time in Sumter County, and being able to come here, I always found it curious the way that this place was presented. In 1830, Andrew Jackson led the Indian Removal Act for the 5 civilized tribes east of the Mississippi. This Indian removal was especially difficult in Florida, as unlike in Tennessee, Georgia, the Carolinas, Alabama, where Indian removal was relatively easy as the Indians had already been surrounded by European settlers, Florida was rather uninhabited even still. The Seminole had their reservation deep within the state. However, the Seminole didn't really care to stay on that reservation. The Seminole made use of these woods that you see around me, or at least these are what's left of those woods they would have called home, to lead a guerrilla resistance. And 5 years after Indian removal, in 1835, about 130 Americans set out towards Fort King in what is modern Marion County. And here in Sumter County, after 5 days of marching quite slowly due to carrying the cannon I mentioned before and a wagon, they encountered the strongest resistance they had seen yet. The moment they sat down and started to rest, 130 Seminole warriors came out of the brush and attacked them. Within moments, nearly the entirety of Major Dade's command was slaughtered, including him. For 7 weeks, their bodies lie out here, one of the most resounding American defeats. Though I could talk on and on about indigenous victory here, and it is an indigenous victory, and it's something that we can look to see that colonists don't always succeed, that there is merit in resistance. But to speak of merit in resistance and to speak of indigenous victory in a place like this, which although is a place of indigenous victory, would do the true history a disservice. There is a reason why I, an American, can come here, property of the state of Florida, within the United States of America, and talk about an American defeat. And that is because this site started the Second Seminole War. It was the start, not the end. It was not the decisive victory that ended the war, it was the decisive ambush that led to its start. In total, there were about 10,000 Seminole left at the advent of the Second Seminole War. We don't really have any way of knowing the full extent, but we do know who was left and who wasn't left at the end of the war. And that is, at the end of the war, through brutal fighting, seeing people like Chief Osceola earn their name in history, about 4,500 Seminole were deported to Oklahoma, and less than 500 remained in Florida. And those 500 would flee into the swamps further and further from American civilization and would become the modern Seminole and Miccosukee tribes of Florida. This site teaches us many lessons about guerrilla warfare, about indigenous resistance, about the hubris of colonizers and their belief in their own inevitable success. Although the colonizers would inevitably be successful, I bet Major Dade thought he would be part of that success, and he was not. He was under an upside-down howitzer where we stand. This monument right here is to Lieutenant Mudge. This is the last of the upside-down cannons on this trail. At the end of the Second Seminole War, less than half of the Seminole people remained. Their people came to Florida in a time of uncertainty where it wasn't confident who would own Florida, the Spanish, the Americans, the British. They formed in this entropy of the native Timucuan people being annihilated from history due to disease and assimilation to Spanish Florida. And the remaining Timucuan who did not assimilate into Spanish society would join the Seminole. The Seminole were a Muskogee people, they still are. And they speak two languages, one related to Hittichi and one related to Muskogee proper, I believe. The Seminole are not one people, and they never were. They were a collection of people who all fought under the same flag, desperate to survive and desperate not to be conquered. And that's exactly what the Dade Massacre was. It was an act of desperation, and that act of desperation led to their inevitable annihilation. Whether it be the war that they started here, or when American troops actually came here prepared, there was no saving their indigenous struggle. And yet they did struggle. And the Seminole are some of the few indigenous people in the United States today, east of the Mississippi, who can say they never surrendered and they still keep at least part of their homeland in the Everglades. Of course, here we are now in Central Florida. They do not control their homeland. They do not control any of this. They still visit to help tell their story, though, even though this is a site of American defeat, more than anything, this is a melancholic site. A melancholic site for all groups involved, American and Seminole. Although a Seminole defeat, it led to an inevitable annihilation of most of their people. And for an American like me coming here, I can appreciate their resilience, though I don't think they would want that, those Seminole fighting 200 years ago. I think they would want this site to be for their descendants to celebrate, not for the white man's. And yet here I am. This has been the Dade Battlefield.